wish for the best for you, your daughter, and your family, and I'm going to do what I think is best for the people of the state, all the people of the state.
Do you think it's best for the governor to come in between the doctors and the patients?
Sir,
is this a nanny state?
Guess what, sir?
I'm just curious because
I'm elected to make these decisions. I'll make the decision.
Please don't let my daughter die, Governor. Don't let my daughter die.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
Stop arresting patients! Stop arresting patients! Stop arresting patients!
Welcome to CMMNJ TV.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
I'm Ken Walski, Executive Director of the Coalition for Medical Marijuana New Jersey. The mission of our organization is to educate the public about the benefits of marijuana. Marijuana is a safe, effective, and inexpensive therapeutic agent for a wide variety of diseases, symptoms, and conditions. No patient should suffer needlessly without it, and no patient should ever go to jail for following the advice of a doctor. Join us and learn more about the exciting science of medical marijuana. I'm here in the Princeton TV studios with Ann Davis, a lawyer from Brick, New Jersey, and via Skype with Keith Stroup from National Normal. Thank you for coming. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
You were one of the principals in a lawsuit where the members sued the Department of Health for the failure to meaningfully implement the medicinal marijuana program here in New Jersey.
Yes. That case had just concluded earlier in February of 2014. What had happened was the legislation passed in 2010, as we all know, and they had initially a 6-month timeline to implement the program, which provided for 6 alternative treatment centers. And as time had passed, they got the extension to October of 2010 and finally selected 6 ATCs, alternative treatment centers, in March of 2011. But as time went on, none of them were opening. In fact, still to date, September of 2014, we only have 3 of those centers open. So there were patients all over the state that were qualified patients. One of our plaintiffs was a terminal patient. She had lung cancer. Who was seeking to utilize the program, but not one center had been open back in October of 2012, I believe that was. And we had another patient who was a former law enforcement corrections officer, and he was being prescribed all kinds of narcotic medication that ultimately led to his kidney failure, liver failure, problems with his stomach. And he was desperately trying to utilize the program. But until it was set up, had he tested positive, he stood to jeopardize losing his pension. So we filed this litigation to try and force the state to do what they were already legislatively mandated to do, which was establish these alternative treatment centers.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
We filed the suit, and basically the appellate division had jurisdiction. And they basically concluded that the selection of the ATCs and the implementation of the ATCs was within a discretion of the department. They came back with it's a very complex program to implement, and we needed to take our time. We needed to make sure everything was done correctly. But we had made several arguments of things that the state was failing to do at the time. And one of those was filing those annual reports. They were required to do beginning in October of 2010, when they were supposed to implement. The first was due in 11. The second report was due in 2012. The third report was due in 2013. And by the time we got to the appellate division, they still hadn't filed a single annual report. There's a reason that was significant, because the legislation contemplated adding more qualifying conditions to the program. But the department, in promulgating the regulations, they made this requirement that no one could petition the department to add more qualifying conditions until 2 annual reports have been filed. So their delay has basically taken all those other patients with conditions that didn't fall under the qualifying conditions. They now have to wait until, I think it's 2016, because they finally filed the report under the order of the appellate court. They finally issued the report February this year. So now patients cannot petition until February 2016, where they otherwise would have been able to do so hadn't it been for that wrongful delay.
Every 42 seconds, someone's arrested for marijuana.
The other argument that we made in filing suit was that the regulations gave them a limited amount of time to approve these alternative treatment centers. To date, these other three have not been technically approved, and one of our arguments was Foundation Harmony, who a reporter found over time that their application contained multiple misrepresentations. They didn't have funding, their board members were bankrupt, and they were involved in some other alleged criminal activity, some of the board members. So we felt there was no way that they were going to ultimately get approval, and part of the litigation was if they weren't going to be approved, there were other applicants that it should have went out to so that the centers could be open. It really has to do with access for patients in the state of New Jersey. There only being 3 centers. Myself, I'm a patient, I don't know if you knew that. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I can't even say it, we'll say MS, sometime last year. And even for myself, the closest center is over an hour away.
You know, medicinal marijuana program we consider a failure here in New Jersey. After 4 years since, over 4 years since the law passed, and only about 2,000 patients in New Jersey have actually qualified for medical marijuana, and we're in a state with almost 9 million people.
Every 42 seconds, someone's arrested for marijuana.
But I want to talk also about you know, the broader issue of marijuana reform, and we're lucky enough to have Keith Stroup here from National Normal. And Keith probably has done more for marijuana reform than any human being in America, quite frankly. He founded Normal, New Jersey, founded Normal rather in 1970, and so you've been with this organization, or this organization has been functioning at least for over 45 years, Keith. So welcome to CMMNJ TV and Princeton TV studios.
Thank you, and Ken, for your generous comments. I assure you there have been lots of other people who have played at least as significant a role as I have. I just happen to be one of the oldest marijuana smokers in America, but thank you.
Well, yeah, I happened to check out your Facebook page yesterday, Keith, and I see that you're going to be, what, 71 years old in December, and yet you look 15 years younger. And you know, you're still flying around the country. You were in Seattle in August, and you're going to Boston in September. Do you think your 50 years of marijuana use has you know, contributed to your vigor and youthful appearance?
Well, I appreciate your kind comments. I think clearly marijuana is a wonderful drug for senior citizens. A lot of my contemporaries, of course, were not familiar with the drug and all of its benefits, and in fact were victims of the Reefer Madness campaign for a long time. The major opponents to legalization in this country were people my age and older. But a lot of that's changing. For the last few years, when the federal government does their surveys, they find they've been getting about a 5% increase in people 55 and above smoking marijuana in this country. And I think that's going to continue because as you get older, you have a lot of aches and pains, and marijuana is very good for those things, and it doesn't have the side effects that most prescription drugs have. So, yeah, I suspect that probably my vim and vigor, to the extent I still have some, has something to do with the fact that I first smoked marijuana in 1965 when I was a freshman at Georgetown Law School, and I've been a regular smoker ever since.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
Really kills me how people say there are no long-term studies of the safety of marijuana, and you know, all they really have to do is look around them. You know, marijuana has been in common use in our society since the 60s, Keith, and really, if people were interested in the long-term effects of this substance, you know, the evidence is certainly there for them to find.
Well, by the way, I agree with that, but you know, I don't even think we have to necessarily convince people that they should be pro-marijuana. it seems to me that we're going through this fascinating phase right now. If I just go back one other reference to 1970 when we had started normal, the year before, the Gallup polling organization for the first time asked the American public how many people support legalizing marijuana, and it was only 12%. As you know, in the last 3 or 4 years, that support has continued to increase to where about 3 years ago, we first ticked up above 50%. And the latest Gallup poll shows that roughly 58% of the entire American public support full legalization.
Every 42 seconds, someone's arrested for marijuana.
Only about 14% of the public are marijuana smokers. So 86% are not. They're non-smoking Americans who've simply come to the conclusion that prohibition doesn't work, just as millions of Americans came to the same conclusion at the end of alcohol prohibition. Now, what that says to me is we want to be very careful as we move forward, because we cannot move forward with full legalization in additional states without the support of a majority of the non-smokers. So, we want to be responsible. We don't want to be blowing smoke in people's faces. We want to, limit our marijuana smoking to situations in which it is appropriate and avoid situations that might frighten non-smoking Americans or drive them away from the issue. But for the moment, it looks like almost any state in which we can qualify a voter initiative on full legalization for the ballot, we can win that initiative now.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
There's still a great deal of work that needs to be done, and we're going to have to go back to those state legislatures to fix the law in at least 3 areas. For one, job discrimination. In those 2 legalization states and in all the states that have medical use except Arizona and I believe Delaware, in all of the others, a private employer remains free to drug test their employees and to fire someone for testing positive for THC without any showing of coming to work in an impaired condition. In other words, if you smoke on the weekend and it's legal under state law to do so, you can still be fired on Monday morning if you test positive. That's clearly unfair, and we have to go back and fix that. The same thing with child custody. There are parents all over the country who are having to fight to maintain custody of their children simply because they have a medical marijuana card or because they're a recreational user. The fact that one smokes marijuana should not suggest that one is an unfit parent. That's incredibly unfair.
Every 42 seconds, somebody's arrested for marijuana.
The third area, I think, is DUID. We need to develop tests to measure impairment for driving, not simply levels of THC, because experienced smokers and people that smoke a lot, like patients, for example, that may smoke several times a day, they may always have more than 5 nanograms of THC in their blood, but in fact, they're not impaired. The tests show they can drive perfectly well. So instead of just saying you have THC in your system, we need to develop impairment tests. So we got a lot of work to do, but again, I don't want to sound discouraging, because I'm not. I think this is the most exciting time any of us that worked on this issue have ever lived through, but we're not done yet by any means.
Well, that's true. 750,000 Americans were arrested on marijuana charges in 2012. Almost 88% of those arrests were for simple possession. And not only do the arrests continue, but the civil penalties continue.
Every 42 seconds, somebody's arrested for marijuana.
I've also been impressed with how I think the professionalism of National Normal has increased and improved over the years. This little booklet that was written by Paul Armentano, The Emerging Clinical Applications for Cannabis and Cannabinoids, we've given away probably 1,000 of them in the state of New Jersey alone. I think this is just such a wonderful booklet that Paul, and the work that Paul does is just really wonderful in National Normal and Alan St. Pierre. But this little booklet, to me, it explains in layman's terms the endocannabinoid system. It is an entirely new system in the human body, like the endocrine system or the respiratory system or the circulatory system. And it was just discovered recently in the 1980s and 1990s.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
I think Paul is just incredibly important to the entire legalization movement. He's the person who stays on top of all of the science, both the positive positive science on how marijuana can help people, but also on the negative claims about marijuana. He debunks a lot of the allegations made by our political opponents, and I think the entire movement has learned over the last several years to rely on Paul when a new study comes out. And by the way, he updates that emerging clinical applications booklet at least twice a year.
Twice a year, that's wonderful.
It is an amazing publication.
Yeah.
It is very, very helpful.
And it's available on our website, by the way, for anyone that wants to download it for free. We encourage it. We're not trying to make money. We just want to get the information out there as widely as possible.
That's wonderful. And you know, many people don't realize that NORML really was the first organization to endorse medical marijuana. When in 1972, when you filed that petition to have the marijuana rescheduled from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2. And, you know, that's such an important story, too, Keith, that I tell quite a bit, you know, how the federal government refused to hold hearings for 14 years on this, you know, and then finally they did hold the hearing from 1986 to 88, and Judge Young's decision that marijuana was the safest therapeutically active substance known to man, and that it should be rescheduled. But then the DEA administrator overturns that decision because that's what in administrative law, he has the power to do that.
And the Court of Appeals let him get by with it. You know, we appealed that, but the D.C. Court of Appeals is a very conservative court. And as you say, they generally allow administrative agencies a lot of discretion, and they allowed him to do that. That was 18 years, that suit. We spent 18 years getting a final positive ruling from the chief administrative law judge, and then the head of DEA simply ignored it.
Every 42 seconds, somebody is arrested for marijuana.
But apparently that's what they can do in administrative law. So
I think we'll win it the old-fashioned way. You know, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to win it legislatively in most states. Now, in some states where they have the initiative process, obviously, we try to win it that way. But half the states don't offer a voter initiative, and Congress doesn't have one. There's no national initiative. So ultimately, we have to win these fights, including the medical use of marijuana, the old-fashioned way by simply getting a bill introduced and building up sufficient support to pass it and get it signed by the governor or the president. That'll happen. It'll take a few more years, but not as long as people think. I really think within 3 or 4 years, we will have the support in Congress to move the federal government out of the way and simply allow states that wish to experiment with legalization to do so without interference from the federal government. You know, we're lucky right now. I know there are a lot of people who are disappointed that President Obama hasn't done more because obviously he was a smoker when he was a young man and he's written about it extensively, as have other people. But what he did was incredibly important. If he had wanted to, he could have gone into federal court when these first 2 states legalized marijuana and likely have gotten an injunction to shut down the distribution systems and the licenses for growers. Because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution, where there's a positive conflict, sorry about my dog, where there's a positive conflict between state and federal law, then federal law generally is supreme. President Obama gave us 2.5 years to demonstrate that we can effectively implement these legalization laws in a responsible manner. And from what I see in both Colorado and Washington, they are doing it very responsibly.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
It's coming over time. I think more research over the past 5 years. I've seen more and more mainstream organizations seeking to engage in research from universities, physicians, pharmaceutical. So I think the more that happens and the more the message gets out publicly, the better off we will be. But that's one of the problems we have in New Jersey are the doctors and their failure to participate. We have less than 1% of the physicians in the state of New Jersey registering with the program. There's just not enough working with the Department of Health and the physicians, putting them in uncomfortable situations where they have to register and put their name on the website, and then they're getting calls from anybody under the planet. It should be like any other drug out there where a physician has the right to prescribe to their patient a medication, and that is private between the doctor and the patient. And that's part of the resistance with the physicians that we have going on in New Jersey. And that really is further restricting the program here.
Plus, if your governor was even halfway supportive, which clearly he is not, then I think it would send a signal to a lot of those physicians that it's okay for them to get involved. But of course, he's taken quite the opposite approach. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to those doctors that are simply afraid to get involved. They're afraid they're going to get a complaint filed by, with the medical association, or they're going to be investigated by the DEA or whatever. Now, there's no evidence of that happening in medical use states, but a lot of physicians still are concerned about that fear.
Well, on that note, that's a really legitimate fear. I'm actually, I was asked by Meridian to give a presentation the end of the month. And their question that they had posed to me was, in their pharmacy departments within their hospitals, specifically it was Bayshore, are they jeopardizing their license by allowing marijuana at their facility? And subsequently, there was a patient in New Jersey that sought treatment in Hackensack ER. And they were told if she gave the child marijuana, he was a qualified patient, they refused treatment. So these two issues came up at the same time, and I had to do some research. And the unfortunate answer is they are jeopardizing their license under federal law if they allow the use of marijuana and they have these licenses. That's a problem we need to address. I don't know, Keith, what your thoughts are on that subject, but that's a very real problem right now that I don't have any better answer other than it would be a violation, and that further restricts patients' rights in the state. In New Jersey, I'm talking specifically.
Every 42 seconds, someone's arrested for marijuana.
And, we're running into those same problems, those of us who are lawyers, both you and I are. The Bar Association ethics rules prior to the medical marijuana legalization movement and the full movement, they have always said that it's unethical for a lawyer to advise a client on how to commit a crime. So, for example, if those ethics rules weren't changed or aren't changed, then lawyers could never represent anyone in the legal marijuana business in the states where it's been legalized, either for medical use or regular. Now, what in fact has been happening with the lawyers, and we still got a few more states to go through, but we have gradually been getting advisory opinions. Some of them have been because of a conflict, and some have been because we invited the Bar Association to do so, that recognize that so long as you advise the client that it still is against federal law, you certainly have the ethical responsibility to advise him on how best to meet the state law that allows him to get a license and get involved in the industry. I think the medical associations are going to have to go through that same process. It is a big transition. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we'll be there in 3 or 4 years.
I did want to just add one point. As Keith said, he wasn't aware. If I bring this to your attention, you may recollect in Massachusetts, where they had a medical program, they required that physicians serve on the board of the dispensaries, and there were letters issued to these doctors that if they didn't withdraw from the boards, that they were jeopardizing their license. Are you aware of that, Keith?
Yes, I do recall. And by the way, you remember, too, in the original Raich case that reached all the way up to the Supreme Court, what they said there was a doctor has a First Amendment right to recommend the use of marijuana to a patient, but they may not take any steps to help them obtain the marijuana. That would be against their own ethical rules, and they could lose their license. So again, the world is changing, and so we're going to have to bring our ethical rules up to speed in all of these professions. And by the way, Ken, I'm sure nursing is the same way.
Well, actually nurses don't have a federal license, Keith, except for nurse practitioners. So nurses are strictly regulated by the state regulations. So, nurses have been a lot more supportive, and basically they have less to lose. There isn't a federal government that can come in and threaten us nurses with, for advocating for medical marijuana. Certainly not. Nursing, the New Jersey State Nurses Association endorsed medical marijuana in 2002, and that we represent 100,000 nurses in the state of New Jersey, and we are the most trusted profession in the United States. And then the American Nurses Association endorsed medical marijuana in 2003. So nurses have been far more supportive of medical marijuana than physicians have been. But on the other hand, and we're the largest healthcare profession in the United States. But on the other hand, we don't have, except for the nurse practitioners who have prescriptive privileges, we don't have the DEA license that the feds can come in and take away.
Yes, yes.
But the fact that you have those two major organizations, nursing organizations, in support, I think is very telling.
Yes. I'm very proud to be a nurse, quite frankly. I've been a nurse for 39 years and in the state of New Jersey, and I'm also licensed in Pennsylvania. And I've been working with the Pennsylvania State Nurses Association to endorse medical marijuana and to work with the legislators there. And there's a very exciting bill in Pennsylvania that would be very good for nurses for not only patients but also nurses in New Jersey.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
What's your feeling on jury nullification?
I was involved in an attempt at jury nullification. You may recall back in 2008, Rick Cusick from High Times Magazine and I were busted sharing a joint at the
We all recall that, Keith.
Boston Freedom Rally. And when they busted us, they were funny. They came up and grabbed us, these undercover narcs, and they didn't say, oh, you shouldn't be smoking. They said, you guys are old enough, you should know better. In other words, our offense was that we were too old to be smoking. And when the case got to court, there was only like a half a joint, I mean, less than a half a joint. And we had the benefit of Charlie Nesson, a Harvard Law School professor, representing us, and some other volunteer help. So we had very good help. And the prosecutor wanted to drop the case when we first got there. In fact, the judge did. He said, oh, if they'll pay court costs, we'll just drop this. And our lawyer jumps up and says, no, we're not paying court costs. We're not dropping the case. We want to go to trial. And about that time, the judge figured out what we were up to. And so he said, fine. And so he assigned it to a judge, and we went to trial. And both Rick and I took the stand and said, of course we were smoking a joint. We were at the Boston Freedom Rally. That's the only reason we would have been there. We were exercising our First Amendment right.
Keith, it's always a thrill to speak with you. And thank you so much for joining us today in our studio here in Princeton, New Jersey. And thank you for coming all the way from Brick to be part of CMMNJ TV.
It's nice to be here, Ken, and I will always support CMMNJ and their efforts and all that you do.
Well, thank you, Ann. For more information about the Coalition for Medical Marijuana in New Jersey, join us at our free public meetings on the second Tuesday of every month at the Lawrence Township Library in Mercer County, New Jersey, from 7 to 9 p.m. Snacks are served and all are welcome. Remember, every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
Every 42 seconds, somebody is arrested for marijuana.
Cada 42 segundos está uno arrestado por marihuana.
Every 42 seconds, somebody is arrested for...
Chaque 42 secondes, il y a arrêté un monde pour marijuana.
Every 42 seconds, somebody got arrested for marijuana.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
Every 42 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana. It could be you.